The transmission arrived without warning. No signal flare. No diplomatic channel. No translation preamble. Just a burst of raw data that forced its way into every system across the fleet at once. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened. Then the screens changed. Every display, navigation, weapons, life support, went dark, replaced by a single image. A blue world. Quiet. Unassuming. Primitive. Commander Elias Vaughn stood frozen on the bridge of the dreadnought Sovereign Claw, his claws tightening against the armrest of his command throne. Around him, officers shifted uneasily, their instruments unresponsive, their training suddenly useless. "Report," he snapped. No one answered. Not because they refused, but because they couldn't. The ship itself wasn't responding. The message wasn't attacking. It was overriding. 3 seconds later, the image vanished. Systems snapped back to life. Alarms remained silent. No damage. No trace. As if it had never happened. But it had. Source. Vaughn demanded. This time, the communications officer found her voice. Unknown. Commander. It originated from the target system, 3rd planet. A murmur rippled across the bridge. Earth. Vaughn narrowed his eyes. Impossible. Their technology level doesn't support that kind of intrusion. That's what we believed, the officer replied carefully. Believed. The word lingered. Uncomfortable. Dangerous. Vaughn turned toward the forward viewport. In the distance, suspended in the black void, the planet rotated slowly. Blue oceans, scattered clouds, harmless. At least, that's what the Council had said. A developing world. Fragmented governance. Limited orbital capability. No unified defense grid. No threat. An easy acquisition. Run a full systems diagnostic, Vaughn ordered. I want to know exactly what just happened. Aye, Commander. The crew moved quickly now, their earlier hesitation replaced by urgency. Fingers danced across consoles. Data streams flooded the air. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. Finally, the chief engineer spoke, his tone uncertain. Commander, there's nothing to report. Vaughn didn't turn. Explain. No breach. No residual code. No hardware anomalies. It's as if the signal never interacted with our systems at all. But it did, Vaughn said quietly. Yes, Commander. Silence settled again. Heavy this time. Vaughn exhaled slowly. Prepare a report for the Council. Mark it as a potential anomaly. A potential anomaly? The tactical officer couldn't hide the disbelief in his voice. Commander, that signal bypassed our entire fleet. And yet it caused no harm, Vaughn replied. No weapons fired. No systems disabled beyond a momentary interruption. Until we understand their intent, we classify, not escalate. The officer hesitated, then nodded. Understood. Vaughn leaned back slightly, though his posture remained rigid. Something about this felt wrong. Not dangerous, at least not in the way he understood danger. It felt deliberate, controlled, as if someone had reached across the void, tapped them on the shoulder, and then stepped back to watch. Commander, the sensors officer said suddenly, we're detecting increased activity from the planet's surface. Vaughn turned sharply. Define activity. Signal traffic. Massive volumes. They're communicating globally. Coordinating? The tactical officer asked. It appears so. Vaughn's gaze hardened. "That's not how a primitive species reacts to an unknown presence," he said. "No, Commander," the census officer agreed. "It's not." Another pause. Then, quietly, the communications officer spoke again. "Commander, there's more." Vaughn looked at her. "Say it." "We've translated fragments of their transmissions." "And—" She hesitated. That alone was enough to set the bridge on edge. "And they're not panicking," she said finally. The words hung in the air. "What are they doing?" Vaughn asked. The officer swallowed. "They're preparing." A chill moved through the room. "Preparing for what?" the tactical officer demanded. The communications officer met Vaughn's gaze. "For us." No one spoke. Not for several seconds. Then Vaughn stood. Slowly, deliberately. "Open a channel to the Council," he ordered. "Priority 1. "Yes, Commander." As the connection initialized, Vaughn took one last look at the planet below. Still blue. Still calm. Still silent. But now he understood. That silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint. The Council's emblem flickered to life before him, a ring of ancient symbols surrounding a central star. "Commander Vaughn," the High Arbiter's voice echoed. "Report." Vaughn didn't hesitate. "We have made an error," he said. A pause. "Clarify." Vaughn's eyes remained fixed on Earth. "We judged the species of this world too soon," he said. "Their capabilities exceed initial projections." "By what margin?" another voice asked. Vaughn considered that, then answered truthfully, "I don't know." Silence followed. Then, predictably, dismissal. "All emerging species display anomalies under observation," the Arbiter said. "You are to proceed as planned." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "With respect, Arbiter, I recommend we delay." Recommendation denied. The Arbiter cut in. "The invasion begins on schedule." The channel closed. Just like that. No debate. No reconsideration. Vaughn stood motionless for a long moment, then slowly returned to his command throne. "Orders, Commander?" the tactical officer asked. Vaughn didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted once more to the planet below, to its oceans, its clouds, its silence. Then he spoke. "Advance the fleet," he said. A pause. Barely noticeable. But it was there. "And remain alert." The ships began to move. Engines igniting in perfect formation. A show of overwhelming force. The kind that had ended civilizations. But as the fleet closed the distance, something strange happened. Earth did not respond. No weapons. No defenses. No warnings. Just that same quiet stillness. Watching. Waiting. And for the first time in his long career, Commander Elias Vaughn felt something he could not explain. Not fear. Not yet. But something close. A realization forming at the edge of his thoughts. They had expected a conquest. Instead, they had announced their arrival. And somewhere on that silent, blue world, someone had already been ready. The fleet expected fire. They expected panic. They expected chaos spreading across the surface of the planet as billions of primitive beings realized what was descending upon them. Instead, Earth remained silent. Commander Elias Vaughn stood motionless as the first wave of invasion ships entered low orbit. Tactical projections hovered in front of him, outlining optimal strike zones, infrastructure targets, and population centers. Everything was ready. Everything was calculated. And yet, nothing happened. No defensive response detected, the sensors officer reported. Confirm, Vaughn said. Confirmed. No weapon systems, no orbital platforms, no missile launches. Surface activity remains stable. Stable. That word again. Vaughn frowned. Begin Phase 1. Deploy reconnaissance units. Aye, Commander. Across the fleet, dozens of smaller vessels broke formation, descending toward the atmosphere in controlled arcs. Their hulls glowed briefly as they cut through the upper layers of the planet's sky. Still no response. No resistance. No warning. Commander, the communications officer said, her voice tight. We are receiving transmissions again. Vaughn's eyes narrowed. From where? The surface. Multiple sources. Global. Put it through. The bridge lights dimmed slightly as the signal was routed into the central display. This time, there was no image at first. Only sound. Voices. Hundreds of them, layered together, overlapping in a chaotic harmony of different languages and tones. Then, slowly, the system began to filter and translate. A single voice emerged. Calm. Measured. We know you are here. The entire bridge went still. No static. No distortion. Perfect clarity. You entered our systems before we could stop you, the voice continued. That was our mistake. Vaughn leaned forward slightly. Our mistake, he repeated under his breath. The voice went on. But you should understand something, it said. We are not unprepared. A flicker passed across the display. Coordinates. Precise. Accurate. Too accurate. Vaughn's gaze sharpened. What am I looking at? The tactical officer's eyes widened. Commander, those are our ships. A cold silence followed. Explain. They've mapped our entire fleet, the officer said. Every vessel, every position, even the cloaked units. That was impossible. Cloaked ships did not appear on scans. Not unless. Unless they're not scanning, Vaughn said quietly. No one responded. Because no one had an answer. The voice returned. We are aware of your capabilities, it said. Your weapons. Your formations. Your strategies. The coordinates shifted, now showing movement predictions. Fleet maneuvers. Attack patterns. Perfectly modeled. Vaughn felt something tighten in his chest. You studied us, he said. The voice didn't deny it. We observed, it replied. You made yourselves visible. That wasn't true. It couldn't be. Their approach had been masked. Their signals encrypted. Their presence hidden until the final stage. And yet, they knew everything. Commander, the sensors officer said urgently. We're losing telemetry from the reconnaissance units. Vaughn snapped his attention back. Cause. No damage detected. They're just going offline. Destroyed. No, Commander. Just gone. One by one, the descending ships disappeared from the tactical display. No explosions. No debris. No signals. Just absence. Recall all units, Vaughn ordered immediately. Attempting, the communications officer replied. No response. The voice spoke again. You should not come closer. The first ship exploded without warning. No incoming fire. No energy spike. No visible cause. One moment it was there, holding formation along the outer ring of the fleet. The next, gone. A flash of light. A ripple of debris. Then nothing. Report. Commander Elias Vaughn barked, rising from his command throne. Unknown detonation, the census officer replied. No external signatures detected. That's not possible, the tactical officer snapped. Something fired. No, sir, the engineer cut in. There's no trace of any weapon discharge. Not from the surface. Not from orbit. Not even internally. Vaughn's eyes narrowed. Internal failure? Negative. The ship was fully operational seconds before destruction. Silence fell over the bridge. Heavy. Unsettling. Then, another explosion. Closer this time. A cruiser in mid-formation ruptured violently, its hull tearing apart from the inside as if reality itself had fractured within it. No signal, the census officer shouted. No warning. Shields. Vaughn demanded. Active and stable. They didn't even register a threat. Vaughn felt it then. Not confusion. Not yet. Pattern. Track the timing, he ordered. What? The tactical officer asked. The explosions, Vaughn said. Find the pattern. The officers scrambled, overlaying data streams across the central display. Timelines, ship positions, system states, all merging into a chaotic storm of information. Seconds passed. Then, Commander, the analyst whispered. There is a pattern. Vaughn stepped forward. Show me. The display shifted. Dots representing ships. 2 gone. A third flickering. Then a sequence line appeared, linking them. Not random, the analyst said. They're selecting targets. Based on what? Vaughn asked. Another pause. Then the answer came. Decision points. The words didn't make sense at first. Explain, Vaughn said. They're targeting ships at the exact moment they initiate a command, the analyst said. Course corrections. Weapon priming. Formation adjustments. The tactical officer's eyes widened. You're saying they're waiting for us to act? Yes. And then, the analyst swallowed. And then they remove the ship. As if summoned by the words. A third vessel vanished, right as it began to pivot into a new attack vector. Vaughn's mind raced. They're not attacking randomly, he said slowly. They're punishing action. A chill spread across the bridge. That's insane, someone whispered. No, Vaughn said quietly. It's efficient. Commander, the engineer said urgently. If that's true, then every command we issue becomes a target, Vaughn finished. Silence. Then the tactical officer spoke, voice tight. Then we stop issuing commands. Vaughn shook his head. No, that's exactly what they want. Confusion flickered across the officer's face. Commander, they're controlling the pace of the battle, Vaughn said. If we freeze, we lose initiative. If we act, we lose ships. Another explosion lit the void. Further out this time, a destroyer, attempting to break formation. Gone. They're herding us, Vaughn said. The realization settled like a weight in his chest. Every movement, every decision, predicted, accounted for, punished. Commander, the census officer said, his voice strained. We're detecting anomalies across multiple ships. Define anomalies. Micro-delays. System latency spikes. Not enough to trigger alarms, but enough to affect timing. Vaughn's eyes sharpened. They're desynchronizing us. Yes, Commander. That explained it. The delays. The predictive accuracy. They weren't just watching the fleet. They were inside the rhythm of it. Like hunters, Vaughn muttered. What? The tactical officer asked. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt controlled. Commander Elias Vaughn stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by a fleet that had forgotten how to move. No one dared to issue commands. No one dared to act without thinking twice, 3 times, 10 times, because every action had a cost, and the cost had become clear. Commander, the intelligence officer said carefully, we've recovered partial data from the lost ships. Vaughn didn't turn. Recovered? Yes, sir. Fragments of internal logs transmitted just before destruction. That alone was unusual. Ships didn't transmit logs during catastrophic failure. They didn't have time. Display it, Vaughn ordered. The central screen flickered to life. Lines of data scrolled rapidly. Timestamps, system checks, command inputs. Then the pattern emerged. Each destroyed ship had one thing in common. A decision. A moment where a command was initiated. And then a gap. A fraction of a second missing from the record. What is that? The tactical officer asked. A void, the engineer said. A missing interval. It's like time itself was skipped. That's not possible, someone muttered. But Vaughn wasn't listening. He stepped closer to the display. Zoom in, he said. The data expanded, breaking down into smaller segments, more precise measurements. And then, there it was. Not empty, not missing, hidden. A layer beneath the recorded data. So it wasn't a gap, Vaughn said slowly. No, the intelligence officer replied. It was masked. The hidden layer unfolded across the screen, and for the first time, they saw it. Foreign code. Not invasive. Not destructive. Integrated. Running alongside their own systems without detection. How long has that been there? Vaughn asked. The engineer's voice shook slightly. Since the first signal. The bridge fell silent. That's impossible, the tactical officer said. We ran full diagnostics. And found nothing, the engineer replied. Because it wasn't interfering. Vaughn's gaze hardened. It was observing. The realization spread like a ripple. They didn't hack us, the communications officer said quietly. They joined us. No one liked the sound of that. What does it do? Vaughn asked. The engineer hesitated, then answered. It learns. The word landed heavier than any explosion. From what? The tactical officer demanded. Everything, the engineer said. Command structures, reaction times, decision trees, behavioral patterns. Vaughn exhaled slowly. They've been studying us from the inside. Yes, Commander. And the ships that were destroyed? The intelligence officer answered this time. They weren't destroyed randomly, she said. They reached a threshold. What kind of threshold? Vaughn asked. A predictive certainty, she said. Once the system understood exactly what the ship would do next. It became unnecessary, Vaughn finished. Silence followed. Cold. Unforgiving. They reduced us to equations, someone whispered. No, Vaughn said quietly. They solved us. The display shifted again. More data. More recovered fragments. But now the perspective changed. Instead of fleet systems, they were looking at Earth, global networks, communication grids, civilian infrastructure, all connected, all active. All of this, the engineer said, it's one system. That's not possible, the tactical officer said. No species operates like that. There's always fragmentation, delay, conflict. Not here, the intelligence officer said. Why? Vaughn asked. No one answered immediately. Then the communications officer spoke. Because they've been doing this for a long time. The screen filled with historical data. Decades, centuries, patterns of growth, adaptation, iteration. They weren't building weapons, she continued. They were building systems. Systems for what? The tactical officer asked. The answer came quietly. For thinking faster. Vaughn felt it again. That shift. That creeping realization becoming undeniable. They don't rely on individuals, he said. They rely on connection. The engineer nodded. Every node strengthens the whole. Every failure improves the system. That's why they didn't attack us immediately, the intelligence officer added. They needed time. To understand us, Vaughn said. Yes. And now? No one needed to answer. They already knew. A new signal appeared on the display. Not forced. Not intrusive. Offered. Commander, the communications officer said. It's a direct channel. Vaughn stared at it for a long moment, then nodded. Open it. The voice returned, calm as ever. You see it now. Vaughn didn't bother denying it. Yes, he said. A pause. Then he asked the question that had been forming since the beginning. What are you? Silence. Brief. Measured. Then, we are what comes next. The words sent a quiet shock through the bridge. That's not an answer, the tactical officer muttered. But Vaughn understood. You're not a single entity, he said. No, not a government. No, not even a species, in the way we define it. Another pause. Then, no. The truth settled into place. Heavy, unavoidable. You're a system, Vaughn said. Yes. The display shifted once more, showing the fleet. What remained of it. Surrounded. Not by weapons, but by awareness. Every ship, every signal, every thought. Seen, understood, predicted. No one gave the order to retreat. And that was the final mistake. Commander Elias Vaughn stood in silence as the fleet drifted above Earth. No longer an invading force, no longer even a threat. Just present, waiting for judgment. Commander, the tactical officer said quietly, we still have enough ships to break orbit. Vaughn didn't respond. Not immediately. Because he knew that was true. They still had firepower. Still had numbers. Still had the ability to burn the planet below into nothing but ash. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was, they would never get the chance. They're letting us choose, Vaughn said at last. The bridge remained still. No one questioned it, because they all felt it. That invisible pressure. Not force. Not coercion. Something worse. Expectation. They could have destroyed us already, the engineer said. Yes, Vaughn replied. But they didn't, the communications officer added. Vaughn nodded slowly. Because this isn't about destruction, he said. It's about understanding. As if summoned by the words, the channel opened again. No alert. No signal spike. Just presence. You have reached the conclusion. Vaughn stepped forward slightly. Yes, he said. A pause. Then he asked the only question that mattered now. What happens next? Silence followed. Long enough to feel deliberate. Measured. Then, that depends on you. The answer was simple. Too simple. Vaughn's gaze drifted to the tactical display. To the fleet. To what remained of it. Every ship still armed. Still dangerous. Still capable of one last, desperate act of defiance. They want us to prove something, the tactical officer said under his breath. No, Vaughn replied quietly. They want us to decide something. The difference mattered. A lot. Another pause. Then the voice spoke again. You came here to take. The words were not angry. Not hostile. Just true. What will you do now? Vaughn felt every eye on the bridge turn toward him. Waiting. Expecting. For the first time since the invasion began, the decision wasn't tactical. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't even military. It was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. Because it couldn't be calculated. Vaughn exhaled slowly, then gave the order. All ships, he said, his voice steady. Power down primary weapons. The bridge froze. Commander, the tactical officer began. That is an order. A long moment passed. Then, one by one, across the fleet, weapons systems went dark. Energy signatures dropped. Targeting arrays disengaged. The silence deepened. Changed. The voice returned. Why? Vaughn didn't hesitate. Because we were wrong, he said. No pride. No deflection. Just truth. Another pause. Then, and now. Vaughn looked at the planet below. At the world they had come to conquer. At the system that had outthought them at every step. We leave, he said. The words felt heavier than any command he had ever given, because they carried something unfamiliar. Not defeat. Something harder. Acceptance. The tactical officer lowered his head. The engineer said nothing. The communications officer simply closed her eyes. They all understood. Set course away from the planet, Vaughn continued. Slow departure. No sudden maneuvers. Aye, Commander, came the quiet reply. The fleet began to move. Carefully. Deliberately. Not like conquerors. Not even like survivors. But like something else. Something that had learned. For several long seconds, nothing happened. No explosions. No interference. No punishment. Just silence. Then the voice spoke one final time. You have changed your approach. Vaughn watched the stars shift as the fleet turned. Yes, he said. Another pause. Then, good. The single word echoed across the bridge. Not as approval, not as praise, but as acknowledgment. You are no longer a threat, the voice continued. Vaughn nodded once. We understand. Do you? The question lingered. Sharp. Precise. Vaughn thought about it. About everything that had happened. The signal. The silence. The precision. The control. The realization. Then he answered. We understand enough. That seemed to be sufficient. Because the presence. That vast, invisible awareness. began to withdraw. Not suddenly, not completely, but enough. Enough for them to feel the difference. For the first time since entering the system, they were no longer being watched so closely. The tension eased. Just slightly. "Commander," the census officer whispered. "They're letting us go." Vaughn didn't smile, didn't relax, because he knew the truth. "They're not letting us go," he said. "They're allowing us to leave." And there was a difference. A very important difference. The fleet continued its slow retreat. Engines humming softly. Weapons silent. No one spoke. Not for a long time. Because there was nothing left to say. They had come to conquer a primitive world. They had expected resistance. War. Victory.